We just kept on till we reached Camelin, he explained. That was the plan originally. Camelin and then Tarvalin. He shifted uncomfortably on the edge of his chair. After keeping everything secret for so long, it's odd to be telling somebody even as much as he was. If we stay on that route, the others will be able to find us, sooner or later. If they're alive, Matt muttered at his plate. Rand did not even glance at Matt. Something compelled him to add, "It could bring you trouble, helping us." Master Gill waved it off with a plump hand. "Can't say as I want trouble, but it wouldn't be the first I've seen. No bloody dark friend will make me turn my back on Tom's friends. This friend of yours from up north now, if she comes to Camelin out here, there are people keep their eyes on comings and goings like that around here, and word spreads." Rand hesitated, then asked, "What about Elida?" The innkeeper hesitated too, and finally shook his head. "I don't think so. Maybe if you didn't have a connection to Tom, she'd winkle it out, and then where would you be? No telling. Maybe in a cell. Maybe worse. They say she has a way of feeling things. What's happened, what's going to happen. They say she can cut right through to what a man wants to hide. I don't know, but I wouldn't risk it. If it wasn't for Tom, you could go to the guards. They'd take care of any dark friends quick enough. But even if you could keep Tom quiet from the guards, word would reach Elida as soon as you mentioned dark friends, and then you're back where we started." "No guards," Rand agreed. Matt nodded vigorously while stuffing a fork into his mouth and got gravy on his chin. "Trouble is, you're caught up in the fringes of politics, lad, even if it's none of your doing. And politics is a foggy mire full of snakes." "What about it?" Rand began, but the innkeeper grimaced suddenly, his chair creaking under his bulk as he sat up straight. The cook was standing in the doorway to the kitchen, wiping her hands with her apron. When she saw the innkeeper looking, she motioned for him to come, then vanished back into the kitchen. "Might as well be married to her," Master Gill said.
"Hey, Fire, how you doing?"
"Finds things that need fixing before I know there's anything wrong. If it's not the drain stopped up or the downspout clogged, it's rats.
Throw one more up.
I keep a clean place, you understand? But with so many people in the city, rats are everywhere. Crowd people together and you get rats. And Camelin is a plague of them all of a sudden. You wouldn't believe what a good cat, a prime ratter, fetches these days. Your room is in the attic. I'll tell the girls which. Any of them can show you to it. And don't worry about dark friends. I can't say much good about the White Cloaks, but between them and the guards, that sort won't dare show their filthy faces in Camelin." His chair squeaked again as he pushed it back and stood. "I hope it isn't the drains again." Rand went back to his food, but he saw that Matt had stopped eating. "I thought you were hungry," he said. Matt kept staring at his plate, pushing one piece of potato in a circle with his fork. "You have to eat, Matt. We need to keep up our strength if we're going to reach Tarvalin." Matt let out a low, bitter laugh. "Tarvalin? All this time it's been Camelin. Moraine will be waiting for us in Camelin. We'd find Perrin and Egwene in Camelin. Everything would be all right if we only got to Camelin. Well, here we are, and nothing's right. No Moraine, no Perrin, no anybody. Now it's everything will be all right if we only get to Tarvalin." "We're alive," Rand said, more sharply than he had intended. He took a deep breath and tried to moderate his tone. "We're alive. That much is all right. And I intend to stay alive. I intend to find out why we're so important. I won't give up. All these people, and any of them, could be dark friends. Master Gill promised to help us awfully quick. What kind of man just shrugs off Aes Sedai and dark friends? It isn't natural. Any decent person would tell us to get out, or something." "Eat," Rand said gently, and watched until Matt began chewing a piece of beef. He left his own hands resting beside his plate for a minute, pressing them against the table to keep them from shaking. He was scared. Not about Master Gill, of course, but there was enough without that. Those tall city walls would not stop a Fade. Maybe he should tell the innkeeper about that. But even if Gill believed, would he be as willing to help if he thought a Fade might show up with the Queen's blessing? And the rats. Maybe rats did thrive where there were a lot of people, but he remembered the dream that was not a dream in Baerlon, and a small spine snapping. Sometimes the Dark One uses carrion eaters as eyes, Lan had said. Ravens, crows, rats. He ate, but when he was done, he could not remember tasting a single bite. The serving maid, the one who had been polishing candlesticks when they came in, showed them up to the attic room. A dormer window pierced the slanting outer wall, with a bed on either side of it, and pegs beside the door for hanging their belongings. The dark-eyed girl had a tendency to twist her skirt and giggle whenever she looked at Rand. She was pretty, but he knew if he said anything to her, he would just make a fool of himself. She made him wish he had Perrin's way with girls. He was glad when she left. He expected some comment from Matt, but as soon as she was gone, Matt threw himself on one of the beds, still in his cloak and boots, and turned his face to the wall. Rand hung his things up, watching Matt's back. He thought Matt had his hand under his coat, clutching that dagger again. "You're just going to lie up here, hiding?" he said finally. "I'm tired," Matt mumbled. "We have questions to ask Master Gilead. He might even be able to tell us how to find Egwene and Perrin. They could be in Camelin already if they manage to hang on to their horses." "They're dead," Matt said to the wall. Rand hesitated, then gave up. He closed the door softly behind him, hoping Matt really would sleep. Downstairs, however, Master Gill was nowhere to be found, though the sharp look in the cook's eye said she was looking for him too. For a while, Rand sat in the common room, but he found himself eyeing every patron who came in, every stranger who could be anyone or anything, especially in the moment when he was first silhouetted as a cloaked black shape in the doorway. A fade in the room would be like a fox in a chicken coop. A guardsman entered from the street. The red-uniformed man stopped just inside the door, running a cool eye over those in the room who were obviously from outside the city. Rand studied the tabletop when the guardsman's eyes fell on him. When he looked up again, the man was gone. The dark-eyed maid was passing with her arms full of towels. "They do that sometimes," she said in a confiding tone as she went by. "Just to see there's no trouble. They look after good queen's folk, they do. Nothing for you to worry about." She giggled. Rand shook his head. Nothing for him to worry about. It was not as if the guardsman would have come over and demanded to know if he knew Tom Maryland. He was getting as bad as Matt. He scraped back his chair. Another maid was checking the oil in the lamps along the wall. "Is there another room where I could sit?" he asked her. He did not want to go back upstairs and shut himself up with Matt's sullen withdrawal. "Maybe a private dining room that's not being used." "There's the library." She pointed to a door. "Through there, to your right, at the end of the hall. Might be empty this hour." "Thank you. If you see Master Gill, would you tell him Randolph Thor needs to talk to him, if he can spare a minute?" "I'll tell him," she said, then grinned. "Cook wants to talk to him, too." The innkeeper was probably hiding, he thought, as he turned away from her. When he stepped into the room to which she had directed him, he stopped and stared. The shelves must have held 300 or 400 books, more than he had ever seen in one place before. Cloth-bound, leather-bound with gilded spines, only a few with wooden covers. His eyes gobbled up the titles, picking out old favorites. The Travels of J. N. Farstrider, the Essays of Willem Monachez. His breath caught at the sight of a leather-bound copy of Voyages Among the Sea Folk. Tam had always wanted to read that. Picturing Tam, turning the book over in his hands with a smile, getting the feel of it before settling down before the fireplace with his pipe to read. His own hand tightened on his sword hilt with a sense of loss and emptiness that dampened all his pleasure in the books. A throat cleared behind him, and he suddenly realized he was not alone. Ready to apologize for his rudeness, he turned. He was used to being taller than almost everyone he met, but this time his eyes traveled up and up and up, and his mouth fell open. Then he came to the head, almost reaching the 10-foot ceiling. A nose as broad as the face, so wide it was more a snout than a nose. Eyebrows that hung down like tails, framing pale eyes as big as teacups. Ears that poked up to tufted points through a shaggy black mane. Trolloc! He let out a yell and tried to back up and draw his sword. His feet got tangled and he sat down hard instead. "I wish you wouldn't do that," rumbled a voice as deep as a drum. The tufted ears twitched violently, and the voice became sad.
So few of you remember us. It's our own fault, I suppose. Not many of us have gone out among men since the shadow fell on the ways. That's, 6 generations now. Right after the War of the 100 Years, it was.
The shaggy head shook and let out a sigh that would have done credit to a bull.
Too long, too long. And so few to travel and see, it might as well have been done.
Rand sat there for a minute, with his mouth hanging open, staring up at the apparition in wide-toed, knee-high boots, and a dark blue coat that buttoned from the neck to the waist, then flared out to his boot tops like a kilt over baggy trousers. In one hand was a book, seeming tiny by comparison, with a finger broad enough for 3 marking the place. "I thought you were," he began, then caught himself. "What are—" That was not any better. Getting to his feet, he gingerly offered his hand. "My name is Randall Thor." A hand as big as a ham engulfed his. It was accompanied by a formal bow.
Loyal, son of Arendt, son of Holland. Your name sings in my ears, Randolph.
That sounded like a ritual greeting to Rand. He returned the bow. "Your name sings in my ears, Loyal, son of Arendt, son of Holland." It was all a little unreal. He still did not know what Loyal was. The grip of Loyal's huge fingers was surprisingly gentle, but he was still relieved to get his hand back in one piece.
You humans are very excitable,
Loyal said in his bass rumble.
I had heard all the stories and read the books, of course, but I didn't realize. My first day in Cayman, I could not believe the uproar. Children cried and women screamed, and a mob chased me all the way across the city, waving clubs and knives and torches and shouting, "Frolic!" I'm afraid I was almost beginning to get a little upset. There's no telling what would have happened if a party of the Queen's Guards hadn't come along.
"A lucky thing," Rand said faintly.
Yes, but even the guardsmen seemed almost as afraid of me as the others. 4 days in Cayman now, and I haven't been able to put my nose outside this inn. Good Master Gill even asked me not to use the common room.
His ears twitched.
Not that he hasn't been very hospitable, you understand. But there was a bit of trouble that first night. All the humans seemed to want to leave at once. Such screaming and shouting. Everyone trying to get through the door at the same time. Some of them could have been hurt.
Rand stared in fascination at those twitching ears.
I'll tell you, it was not for this I left the steady.
"You're an Ogier!" Rand exclaimed. "Wait, 6 generations? You said the War of the 100 Years. How old are you?" He knew it was rude as soon as he said it, but Loyal became defensive rather than offended.
90 years,
the Ogier said stiffly.
In only 10 more, I'll be able to address the stump. I think the elders should have let me speak since they were deciding whether I could leave or not. But then they always worry about anyone of any age going outside. You humans are so hasty, so erratic.
He blinked and gave a short bow.
Please forgive me. I shouldn't have said that. But you do fight all the time, even when there's no need to.
"That's all right," Rand said. He was still trying to take in Loyal's age. Older than old Sen Bui, and still not old enough to...
Got 2 rolled
He
up.
sat down in one of the high-backed chairs. Loyal took another, made to hold 2. He filled it. Sitting, he was as tall as most men standing. "At least they did let you go." Loyal looked at the floor, wrinkling his nose and rubbing at it with one thick finger.
Well, as to that now. You see, the stump had not been meeting very long, not even a year. But I could tell from what I heard that by the time they reached a decision, I would be old enough to go without their permission. I am afraid they'll say I put a long handle
Now
on
time
my
to do a
axe.
dab.
I just
You actually got a
left.
hooked up with the little
The
dabs
elders
from
always said I was too
Ouija
hot-headed,
buds.
and I fear I've proven them right. wonder if they have realized I'm gone yet. But I had to go.
Rand bit his lip to keep from laughing. If Loyal was a hot-headed Ogier, he could imagine what most Ogier were like. Had not been meeting very long, not even a year, Master Alvear would just shake his head in wonder. A village council meeting that lasted half a day would have everybody jumping up and down, even Harald Luhan. A wave of homesickness swept over him, making it hard to breathe from memories of Tam and Egwene, and the Wine Spring Inn and Beldine on the Green in happier days. He forced them away. If you don't mind my asking, he said, clearing his throat, why did you want to go, outside so much? I wish I'd never left my home myself.
Why, to see,
Loyal said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world.
I read the books, all the travelers' accounts, and it began to burn in me that I had to see, not just read.
His pale eyes brightened and his ears stiffened.
I studied every scrap I could find about traveling, about the ways and customs in human lands, and the cities we built for you humans after the breaking of the world. And the more I read, the more I knew that I had to go outside, go to those places we had been, and see the groves for myself.
Rand blinked. Groves?
Yes, the groves. The trees. Only a few of the great trees, of course, towering to the sky to keep memories of the steading fresh.
His chair groaned as he shifted forward, gesturing with his hands, one of which still held the book. His eyes were brighter than ever, and his ears almost quivered.
Mostly they use the trees of the land and the place. You cannot make the land go against itself. Not for long. The land will rebel. You must shape the vision to the land, not the land to the vision. In every grove was planted every tree that would grow and thrive in that place, each balanced against the next, each place to complement the others, for the best growing, of course, but also so that the balance would sing in the eye and the heart. Ah, the books spoke of groves to make elders weep and laugh at the same time. Groves to remain green in memory forever.
What about the cities? Rand asked. Loyal gave him a puzzled look. The cities. The cities the Ogier built. Here, for instance, Camelin. Ogier built Camelin, didn't you? The stories say so.
Working with stone.
His shoulders gave a massive shrug.
That was just something we learned in the years after the breaking. During the exile, when we were still trying to find the steading again. It is a fine thing, I suppose, but not the truth. Try as you will, and I have read that the Ogier, who built those cities, truly did try. You cannot make stone. But we still do work with stone, but only because you humans damage the building so often with your wars. There were a handful of Ogier in
Tyrian.
it's called now. When I passed through, they were from another steading, luckily, so they didn't know about me. But they were still suspicious that I was outside alone so young. I suppose in this world there was no reason for me to think that. In any case, working with stone is just something that was thrust on us by the weaving of the pattern. The groves came from the heart.
Rand shook his head. Half the stories he had grown up with had just been stood on their heads. I didn't know Ogier believed in the pattern, Loyal.
Of course we believe. The wheel of time weaves the pattern of the ages, and lives are the threads it weaves. No one can tell how the thread of his own life will be woven into the pattern, or how the thread of a people will be woven. It gave us the breaking of the world, and the exile, and stone, and the longing. And eventually, it gave us back the steady before we all died. Sometimes I think the reason you humans are the way you are is because your threads are so short. They must jump around in the weaving. Oh, there, I've done it again. The elders say you humans don't like to be reminded of how short a life you live. I hope I didn't hurt your feelings.
Rand laughed and shook his head. Not at all. I suppose it'd be fun to live as long as you do, but I never really thought about it. I guess if I live as long as old Sen Bowie, that'll be long enough for anybody.
He is a very old man.
Rand just nodded. He was not about to explain that old Sen Bowie was not quite as old as Loyal.
Well,
Loyal said,
perhaps you humans do have short lives, but you do so much with them. Always jumping around, always so hasty. And you have the whole world to do it in. We Ogier are bound to our steady.
You're outside.
For a time, Rand. But I must go back eventually. This world is yours, yours and your kind's. The steading are mine. There's too much hurly-burly outside, and so much has changed from what I read about.
Well, things do change over the years. Some, anyway.
Some. Half the cities I read about aren't even there any longer, and most of the rest are known by different names. You take Kyrian. The city's proper name is Alkai Ryan Alan, Hill of the Golden Dawn. They don't even remember for all of the sunrise on their banners. And the grove there, I doubt if it has been tended since the Trollop Wars. It's just another forest now, where they cut firewood. The great trees are all gone, and no one remembers them. And here, Camelin is still Camelin, but they let the city grow right over the grove. We're not a quarter of a mile from the center of it, right where we sit, from where the center of it should be. Not a tree of it left. I've been to Tyr and Ilium too. Different names and no memories. There's only pasture for their horses where the grove was at Tyr, and at Ilion the grove is in the king's park, where he hunts his deer, and none allowed inside without his permission. It has all changed, Bran. I fear very much that I will find the same everywhere I go. All the grove's gone, all the memories gone, all the dreams dead.
You can't give up, Loyal. You can't ever give up. If you give up, you might as well be dead. Rand sank back in his chair, as far as he could go, his face turning red. He expected the Ogier to laugh at him, but Loyal nodded gravely instead.
Yes, that's the way of your kind, isn't it?
The Ogier's voice changed, as if he were quoting something.
Till shade is gone, till water is gone. Into the shadow with teeth bared, screaming defiance with the last breath to spit in Sightblinder's eye on the last day.
Loyal cocked his shaggy head expectantly, but Rand had no idea what it was he expected. A minute went by with Loyal waiting, then another, and his long eyebrows began to draw down in puzzlement. But he still waited, the silence growing uncomfortable for Rand. The great trees, Rand said finally, just for something to break that silence. Are they like Avendasora? Loyal sat up sharply. His chair squealed and cracked so loudly Rand thought it was going to come apart.
You know better than that. You, of all people.
Me? How would I know?
Are you playing a joke on me? Sometimes you Aielmen think the oddest things are funny.
What? I'm not an Aielman. I'm from the Two Rivers. I never even saw an Aielman. Loyal shook his head, and the tufts on his ears drooped outward.
You see, everything is changed, and half of what I know is useless. I hope I did not offend you. I'm sure your Two Rivers is a very fine place, wherever it is.
Somebody told me, Rand said, that it was once called Manetheren. I'd never heard of it, but maybe you. The Ogier's ears had perked up happily.
Ah, yes, Manetheren.
The tufts went down again.
There was a very fine grove there. Your pain sings in my heart, Randolph. We could not come in time.
Loyal bowed where he sat, and Rand bowed back. He suspected Loyal would be hurt if he did not, would think he was rude at the very least. He wondered if Loyal thought he had the same sort of memories the Ogier seemed to. The corners of Loyal's mouth and eyes were certainly turned down, as if he were sharing the pain of Rand's loss, just as if the destruction of Manetheren were not something that happened 2,000 years ago. Near enough, something that Rand only knew about because of Moraine's story. After a time, Loyal sighed.
The wheel turns,
He said,
no one knows it's turning. But you have come almost as far from your home as I have. A very considerable distance as things are now. When the ways were freely open, of course. That is long past. Tell me what brings you so far. Is there something you want to see too?
Rand opened his mouth to say that they had come to see the false dragon, and he could not say it. Perhaps it was because Loyal acted as if he were no older than Rand, 90 years old or no 90 years old. Maybe for an Ogier, 90 years was not any older than he was. It had been a long time since he had been able to really talk to anyone about what was happening. Always the fear that they might be dark friends or think he was. Matt was so drawn in on himself, feeding his fears on his own suspicions, that he was no good for talking. Rand found himself telling Loyal about Winter Night. Not a vague story about dark friends. The truth about Trollocs breaking in the door and a fate on the quarry road. Part of him was horrified at what he was doing, but it was almost as if he were two people, one trying to hold his tongue while the other only felt the relief at being able to tell it all finally. The result was that he stumbled and stuttered and jumped around in the story. Shadar Logoth and losing his friends in the night, not knowing if they were alive or dead. The fate in Whitebridge, Tom dying so they could escape. The fate in Baerlon, dark friends later, Howell Goad. And the boy who was afraid of them, and the woman who tried to kill Matt. The half-man outside the Goose and Crown. When he started babbling about dreams, even the part of him that wanted to talk felt the hackles rising on the back of his neck. He bit his tongue, clamping his teeth shut. Breathing heavily through his nose, he watched the Ogier warily, hoping he thought he had meant nightmares. The light knew it all sounded like a nightmare, or enough to give anyone nightmares. Maybe Loyal would just think he was going mad. Maybe...
Taviran,
Loyal said. Rand blinked.
What? Taviran.
Loyal rubbed behind a pointed ear with one blunt finger and gave a little shrug.
Elder Hammond always said I never listened, but sometimes I did. Sometimes I listened. You know how the pattern is woven, of course.
I never really thought about it, he said slowly. It just is.
Yes, well, not exactly. You see, the wheel of time weaves the pattern of the ages, and the threads it uses are lives. It is not fixed, the pattern, not always. If a man tries to change the direction of his life and the pattern has room for it, the wheel just weaves on and takes it in. There is always room for small changes, but sometimes the pattern simply won't accept a big change no matter how hard you try. You understand?
Rand nodded. I could live on the farm or in Emmons Field, and that would be a small change. If I wanted to be a king, though, he laughed, and Loyal gave a grin that almost split his face in two. His teeth were white and as broad as chisels.
Yes, that's it. But sometimes the change chooses you, or the wheel chooses it for you. Sometimes the wheel bends a life thread or several threads in such a way that all the surrounding threads are forced to swirl around it. And those force other threads, and those still others, and on and on. That first bending to make the web, that is Taviran. And there is nothing you can do to change it, not until the pattern itself changes. The web,
Tomorrow Island,
it's called, can last for weeks or for years. It can take in a town or even the whole pattern. Archer Hawkwing was Taviran. So was Luz Theron Kinslayer, for that matter, I suppose.
He let out a booming chuckle.
Elder Hammond would be proud of me. He always droned on, and the books about traveling were much more interesting. But I did listen sometimes.
That's all very well, Rand said, but I don't see what it has to do with me. I'm a shepherd, not another Archer Hawkwing. And neither is Matt or Parent. It's just ridiculous.
I didn't say you were, but I could almost feel the pattern swirl just listening to you tell your tale. And I have no talent there. You are Taviran, all right. You and maybe your friends, too.
The ogre paused, rubbing the bridge of his nose thoughtfully. Finally, he nodded to himself as if he had reached a decision.
I wish to travel with you, Rand.
For a minute, Rand stared, wondering if he had heard correctly. With me? He exclaimed when he could speak. Did you hear what I said about... He eyed the door suddenly. It was shut tight and thick enough that anyone trying to listen on the other side would hear only a murmur, even with his ear pressed against the wooden panels. Just the same, he went on in a lower voice. About who's chasing me? Anyway, I thought you wanted to see your trees.
There is a very fine grove at Tarvalon, and I have been told the Aes Sedai keep it well tended. Besides, it is not just the groves I want to see. Perhaps you are not another Archer Hawkwing, but for a time at least, part of the world will shape itself around you. Perhaps is even now shaping itself around you. Even Elder Hammond would want to see that.
Rand hesitated. It would be good to have someone else along. The way Matt was behaving, being with him was almost like being alone. The Ogier was a comforting presence. Maybe he was young, as Ogier reckoned age, but he seemed as unflappable as a rock, just like Tan. And Loyal had been to all of those places and knew about others. He looked at the Ogier sitting there with his broad face and picture of patience. Sitting there, and taller sitting than most men standing. How do you hide somebody almost 10 feet tall? He sighed and shook his head. I don't think that is a good idea, Loyal. Even if Moraine finds us here, we'll be in danger all the way to Tarvalon. If she does not, if she doesn't, then she's dead and so is everyone else. Egwene. He gave himself a shake. Egwene was not dead, and Moraine would find them. Lyle looked at him sympathetically and touched his shoulder.
I am sure your friends are well, Rand.
Rand nodded his thanks. His throat was too tight to speak.
Will you at least talk with me sometimes?
Lyle sighed, a bass rumble.
And perhaps play a game of stones. I have not had anyone to talk to in days, except good Master Gil, and he is busy most of the time. The cook seems to run him unmercifully. Perhaps she really owns the inn?
Of course I will. His voice was hoarse. He cleared his throat and tried to grin. And if we meet in Tarvalon, you can show me the grove there. They have to be all right. Light said they're all right.
Chapter 37. The Long Chase. Nynaeve gripped the reins of the three horses and peered into the night as if she could somehow pierce the darkness and find the Aes Sedai and the warder. Skeletal
we
trees
just definitely
surrounded
awesome.
her, stark and black in the dim moonlight.
She definitely helps out
The
a lot.
trees and the night made an effective screen for whatever Moraine and Lan were doing, not that either of them had paused to let her know what that was. A low, "Keep the horses quiet," from Lan, and they were gone, leaving her standing like a stable boy. She glanced at the horses and sighed with exasperation. Landar blended into the night almost as well as his master's cloak. The only reason the battle-trained stallion was letting her get this close was because Lan had handed her the reins himself. He seemed calm enough now, but she remembered all too well the lips drawing back silently when she reached for his bridle without waiting for Lan's approval. The silence had made the bared teeth seem that much more dangerous. With a last wary look at the stallion, she turned to peer in the direction the other two had gone, idly stroking her own horse. She gave a startled jump when Aldi pushed a pale muzzle under her hand. But after a minute she gave the white mare a pat, too. "No need to take it out on you, I suppose," she whispered, "just because your mistress is a cold-faced—" She strained at the darkness again. What were they doing? After leaving Whitebridge, they had ridden through villages that seemed unreal in their normality, ordinary market villages that seemed to Nynaeve unconnected to a world that had fades and trollocs and Aes Sedai. They had followed the Camelin road until at last Moiraine sat forward in Aldeeb's saddle, peering eastward as if she could see the whole length of the great highway, all the many miles to Camelin, and see, too, what waited there. Eventually, the Aes Sedai let out a long breath and settled back. "The wheel weaves as the wheel wills," she murmured, "but I cannot believe it weaves an end to hope. I must first take care of that of which I can be certain. It will be as the wheel weaves." And she turned her mare north, off the road into the forest. One of the boys was in that direction with the coin Moiraine had given him. Lan followed. Nynaeve gave a long last look at the Camelin road. Few people shared the roadway with them there. A couple of high-wheeled carts and one empty wagon in the distance. A handful of folk afoot with their belongings on their backs, or piled on pushcarts. Some of those were willing to admit they were on their way to Camelin to see the false dragon, but most denied it vehemently, especially those who had come through Whitebridge. At Whitebridge she had begun to believe Moiraine. Somewhat. More, at any rate, and the warder and the Aes Sedai were almost out of sight through the trees before she started after them. She hurried to catch up. Lan looked back at her frequently and waved for her to come on, but he kept at Moiraine's shoulder, and the Aes Sedai had her eyes fixed ahead. One evening after they left the road, the invisible trail failed. Moiraine, the unflappable Moiraine, suddenly stood up beside the small fire where the tea kettle was boiling, her eyes widening. "It is gone," she whispered at the night. "He is—" Nynaeve could not finish the question. "Right. I don't even know which one it is." "He did not die," the Aes Sedai said slowly, "but he no longer has the token." She sat down, her voice level and her hand steady as she took the kettle off the flames and tossed in a handful of tea. "In the morning we will keep on as we've been going. When I get close enough, I can find him without the coin." As the fire burned down to coals, Lan rolled himself in his cloak and went to sleep. Nynaeve could not sleep. She watched the Aes Sedai. Moiraine had her eyes closed, but she sat upright, and Nynaeve knew she was awake. Long after the last glow had faded from the coals, Moiraine opened her eyes and looked at her. She could feel the Aes Sedai's smile even in the dark. "He has regained the coin, Wisdom. All will be well." She lay down on her blankets with a sigh, and almost at once was breathing deep in slumber. Nynaeve had a hard time joining her, tired as she was. Her mind conjured up the worst, no matter how she tried to stop it. All will be well. After Whitebridge, she could no longer make herself believe that so easily. Abruptly, Nynaeve was jerked from memory back to the night. There really was a hand on her arm. Stifling the cry that rose in her throat, she fumbled for the knife at her belt, her hand closing on the hilt before she realized that the hand was Lan. The warder's hood was thrown back, but his chameleon-like cloak blended so well with the night that the dim blur of his face seemed to hang suspended in the night. The hand on her arm appeared to come out of thin air. She drew a shuddering breath. She expected him to comment on how easily he had come on her unaware, but instead he turned to dig into his saddlebags. "You are needed," he said, and knelt to fasten hobbles on the horses. As soon as the horses were secured, he straightened, grasped her hand, and headed off into the night again. His dark hair fit into the night almost as well as his cloak, and he made even less noise than she did. Grudgingly, she had to admit that she could never have followed him through the darkness without his grip as a guide. She was not certain she could pull loose if he did not want to release her anyway. He had very strong hands. As they came up on a small rise, barely enough to be called a hill, he sank to one knee, pulling her down beside him. It took her a moment to see that Moiraine was there, too. Unmoving, the Aes Sedai could have passed for a shadow in her dark cloak. Lan gestured down the hillside to a large clearing in the trees. Nynaeve frowned in the dim moonlight, then suddenly smiled in understanding. Those pale blurs were tents in regular rows, a darkened encampment. White cloaks, Lan whispered. 200 of them, maybe more. There's good water down there, and the lad we're after. In the camp? She felt more than saw Lan nod. In the middle of it. Moiraine can point right to him. I went close enough to see he's under guard. A prisoner? Nynaeve said. Why? I don't know. The children should not be interested in a village boy, not unless there was something to make them suspicious. The light knows it doesn't take much to make white cloaks suspicious, but it still worries me. How are you going to free him? It was not until he glanced at her that she realized how much assurance there had been in her that he could march into the middle of 200 men and come back with the boy. Well, he is a warder. Some of the stories must be true. She wondered if he was laughing at her, but his voice was flat and businesslike. I can bring him out, but he'll likely be in no shape for stealth. If we're seen, we may find 200 white cloaks on our heels and us riding double, unless they are too busy to chase us. Are you willing to take a chance? To help an Emmons fielder? Of course. What kind of chance? He pointed into the darkness again, beyond the tents. This time she could make out nothing but shadows. They're horse lines. If the picket ropes are cut, not all the way through, but enough so they'll break when Moiraine creates a diversion, the white cloaks will be too busy chasing their own horses to come after us. There are 2 guards on that side of the camp, beyond the picket lines, but if you are half as good as I think you are, they'll never see you. She swallowed hard. Stalking rabbits was one thing. Guards, though,
Oh,
with
yeah,
spears
cheers.
and swords. So he thinks I'm I'll do it. Lan nodded again as if he had expected no less. One other thing. There are wolves about tonight. I saw 2, and if I saw that many, there are probably more. He paused, and though his voice did not change, she had the feeling he was puzzled. It was almost as if they wanted me to see them. Anyway, they shouldn't bother you. Wolves usually stay away from people. I wouldn't have known that, she said sweetly. I only grew up around shepherds. He grunted, and she smiled into the darkness. We'll do it now, then, he said. Her smile faded as she peered down at the camp full of armed men. 200 men with spears and swords, and before she could reconsider, she eased her knife in its sheath and started to slip away. Moiraine caught her arm in a grip almost as strong as Lan's. Take care, the Aes Sedai said softly. Once you cut the ropes, return as quickly as you can. You are a part of the pattern, too, and I would not risk you, any more than any of the others if the whole world was not at risk in these days. Nynaeve rubbed her arm surreptitiously when Moiraine released it. She was not about to let the Aes Sedai know the grip had hurt, but Moiraine turned back to watch the camp below as soon as she let go. And the water was gone, Nynaeve realized with a start. She had not heard him leave. Light blind the bloody man. Quickly she tied her skirts up to give her legs freedom and hurried into the night. After that first rush with fallen branches cracking under her feet, she slowed down, glad there was no one there to see her blush. The idea was to be quiet, and she was not in any kind of competition with the warder. Oh no. She shook off the thought and concentrated on making her way through the dark woods. It was not hard in and of itself. The faint light of the waning moon was more than enough for anyone who had been taught by her father, and the ground had a slow, easy roll. But the trees, bare and stark against the night sky, constantly reminded her that this was no childhood game, and the keening wind sounded all too much like Trolloc horns. Now that she was alone in the darkness, she remembered that the wolves that usually ran away from people had been behaving differently in the 2 rivers this winter. Relief flooded through her like warmth when she finally caught the smell of horses. Almost holding her breath, she got down on her stomach and crawled upwind toward the smell. She was nearly on the guards before she saw them, marching toward her out of the night, white cloaks flapping in the wind and almost shining in the moonlight. They might as well have carried torches. Torchlight could not have made them much more visible. She froze, trying to make herself a part of the ground. Nearly in front of her, not 10 paces away, they marched to a halt with a stomp of feet, facing each other, spears shouldered. Just beyond them, she could make out shadows that had been horses. The stable smell, horse and manure, was strong. "All is well with the night," one white-cloaked shape announced. "The light illumine us and protect us from the shadow." "All is well with the night," the other replied. "The light illumine us and protect us from the shadow." With that, they turned and marched off into the darkness again. Nynaeve waited, counting to herself while they made their circuit twice. Each time they took exactly the same count, and each time they rigidly repeated the same formula, not a word more or less. Neither so much as glanced to one side. They stared straight ahead as they marched up, then marched away. She wondered if they would have noticed her even if she had been standing up. Before the night swallowed the pale swirl of their cloaks a third time, she was already on her feet, running in a crouch toward the horses. As she came close, she slowed so as not to startle the animals. The white-cloaked guards might not see what was not shoved under their noses, but they would certainly investigate if the horses suddenly began whickering. The horses along the picket lines, there was more than one row, were barely realized masses in the darkness, heads down. Occasionally one snorted or stamped a foot in its sleep. In the dim moonlight, she was nearly on the end post of the picket line before she saw it. She reached for the picket line and froze when the nearest horse raised its head and looked at her. Its single lead rein was tied in a big loop around the thumb-thick line that ended at the post. One whinny. Her heart tried to pound its way out of her chest, sounding loud enough to bring the guards. Never taking her eyes off the horse, she sliced at the picket rope, feeling in front of her blade to see how far she had cut. The horse tossed its head, and her breath went cold. Just one whinny. Only a few thin strands of hemp remained whole under her fingers. Slowly she headed toward the next line, watching the horse until she could no longer see if it was looking at her or not, then drew a rapid breath. If they were all like that, she did not think she would last. At the next picket rope, though, and the next, the horses remained asleep, even when she cut her thumb and bit off a yelp. Sucking the cut, she looked warily back the way she had come. Upwind as she was, she could no longer hear the guards make their exchange, but they might have heard her if they were in the right place. If they were coming to see what the noise had been, the wind would keep her from hearing them until they were right on top of her. Time to go. With 4 horses out of 5 running loose, they won't be chasing anyone. But she did not move. She could imagine Lan's eyes when he heard what she had done. There would be no accusation in them. Her reasoning was sound, and he would not expect any more of her. She was a wisdom, not a bloody great invincible warder who could make himself all but invisible. Jaw set, she moved to the last picket line. The first horse on it was Bella. There was no mistaking that squat, shaggy shape. For there to be another horse like that, here and now, was too big a coincidence. Suddenly she was so glad that she had not left off this last line that she was shaking. Her arms and legs trembled so that she was afraid to touch the picket rope, but her mind was as clear as the white
Tango's
spring
almost
water.
down.
Whichever of the
Have
boys
this
was
cool
in the
little-
camp, Egwene was there too. And if they left
It's
riding
made to
double,
hold the
some of the
cones.
children would catch them no matter
Actually
how
made
well the
by
horses were scattered,
raw.
and some of them would die. She was as certain as if she were listening to the wind. That stuck a spike of fear into her belly, fear of how she was certain. This had nothing to do with weather or crops or sickness. Why did Moiraine tell me I can use the power? Why couldn't she leave me alone?
Tangled one's down.
Strangely, the fear stilled her trembling.
Not really.
With
It's
hands as
just
steady as if she were grinding herbs in her own house, she slit the
It
picket
holds,
rope as she had the others.
it's made to hold the
Thrusting the
cones.
dagger back into its sheath, she
Or-
untied Bella's lead rein.
I use it to
The
hold the
shaggy mare
joints.
woke with a start, tossing her head, but Nynaeve stroked her nose and spoke comforting words softly in her ear. Bella gave a low snort and seemed content. Other horses along that line were awake too and looking at her. Remembering Mandarb, she reached hesitantly to the next lead rein, but that horse gave no objection to a strange hand. Indeed, it seemed to want some of the muzzle stroking that Bella had received. She gripped Bella's rein tightly and wrapped the other around her other wrist, all the while watching the camp nervously. The pale tents were only 30 yards off, and she could see men moving among them. If they noticed the horses stirring and came to see what caused it, desperately she wished for Moiraine not to wait on her return. Whatever the Aes Sedai was going to do, let her do it now. Light, make her do it now before... Abruptly, lightning shattered the night overhead, for a moment obliterating darkness. Thunder smote her ears, so hard she thought her knees would buckle, as a jagged trident stabbed the ground just beyond the horses, splashing dirt and rocks like a fountain. The crash of riven earth fought the thunderstroke. The horses went mad, screaming and rearing. The picket rope snapped like thread where she had cut them. Another lightning bolt sliced down before the image of the first faded. Nynaeve was too busy to exult. At the first clash, Bella jerked one way while the other horse reared away in the opposite direction. She thought her arms were being pulled out of their sockets. For an endless minute she hung suspended between the horses, her feet off the ground, her scream flattened by the second crash. Again the lightning struck, and again, in what
Battery low. Battery. 10%.
the way they wanted to go, the horses surged back, letting her drop. She wanted to crouch on the ground and soothe her tortured shoulders, but there was no time. Bella and the other horse buffeted her, eyes rolling wildly till only whites showed, threatening to knock her down and trample her. Somehow she made her arms lift, clutched her hands in Bella's mane, pulled herself onto the heaving mare's back. The other rein was still around her wrist, pulled tight into the flesh. Her jaw dropped as a long gray shadow snarled past, seeming to ignore her and the horses with her, but teeth snapping at the crazed animals now darting in every direction. A second shadow of death followed close behind. Nynaeve wanted to scream again, but nothing came out. Wolves? Light, help us. What is Moiraine doing? The heels she dug into Bella's sides were not needed. The mare ran, and the other was more than happy to follow. Anywhere, so long as they could run, so long as they could escape the fire from the sky that killed the night.
Chapter 38. Rescue. Perrin shifted as best he could with his wrists bound behind him, and finally gave up with a sigh. Every rock he avoided brought him two more. Awkwardly, he tried to work his cloak back over it. The night was cold, and the ground seemed to draw all the heat out of him, as it had every night since the White Cloaks took them. The children did not think prisoners needed blankets or shelter, especially not dangerous dark brands. Egwene lay huddled against his back for warmth, sleeping the deep sleep of exhaustion. She never even murmured at his shifting. The sun was long hours below the horizon, and he ached from head to foot after a day of walking behind a horse with a halter around his neck, but sleep would not come for him. The column did not move that fast. With most of their remounts lost to the wolves in the steading, the White Cloaks could not push on as hard as they wanted. The delay was another thing they held against the Emmonsfielders. The sinuous double line did move steadily, though. Lord Bornhold meant to reach Camelin in time for whatever it was. And always in the back of Perrin's mind was the fear that if he fell, the White Cloak holding his leash would not stop, no matter Lord Captain Bornhold's orders to keep them alive for the questioners in Amador. He knew he could not save himself if that happened. The only times they freed his hands were when he was fed and for visits to the latrine pit. The halter made every step momentous, every rock underfoot potentially fatal. He walked with muscles tense, scanning the ground with anxious eyes. Whenever he glanced at Egwene, she was doing the same. When she met his eyes, her face was tight and frightened. Neither of them dared take their eyes off the ground long enough for more than a glance. Usually he collapsed like a wrung-out rag as soon as the White Cloaks let him stop. But tonight his mind was racing. His skin crawled with dread that had been building for days. If he closed his eyes, he would see only the things Bayar promised for them once they reached Amador. He was sure Egwene still did not believe what Bayar told them in that flat voice. If she did, she would not be able to sleep no matter how tired she was. In the beginning, he had not believed Bayar either. He still did not want to. People just did not do things like that to other people. But Bayar did not really threaten. As if he were talking about getting a drink, he talked about hot irons and pincers, about knives slicing away skin and needles piercing. He did not appear to be trying to frighten them. There was never even a touch of gloating in his eyes. He just did not care if they were frightened or not, if they were tortured or not, if they were alive or not. That was what brought cold sweat to Perrin's face once it got through to him. That was what finally convinced him Bayar was telling the simple truth. The two guards' cloaks gleamed grayly in the faint moonlight. He could not make out their faces, but he knew they were watching. As if they could try something, tied hand and foot the way they were. But when there had still been light enough to see, he remembered the disgust in their eyes and the pinched looks on their faces, as though they had been set to guard filth-soaked monsters, stinking and repellent to look at. All the white cloaks looked at them that way. It never changed.
This guy tried to do
They
my
believe we aren't dark friends when they're already convinced we are.
daily on
His
raid.
stomach twisted sickeningly. In the end, he would probably confess to anything just to make the questioners stop. Someone was coming, a white cloak carrying a lantern. The man stopped to speak with the guards, who answered respectfully. Perrin could not hear what was said, but he recognized the tall, gaunt shape. He squinted as the lantern was held close to his face. Bayar had Perrin's axe in his other hand. He had appropriated the weapon as his own. At least, Perrin never saw him without it. Wake up, Bayar said, emotionlessly, as if he thought Perrin slept with his head raised. He accompanied the words with a heavy kick in the ribs. Perrin gave a grunt through gritted teeth. His sides were a mass of bruises already from Bayar's boots. I said wake up. The foot went back again, and Perrin spoke quickly. I'm awake. You had to acknowledge what Bayar said, or he found ways to get your attention. Bayar set the lantern on the ground and bent to check his bonds. The man jerked roughly at his wrist, twisting his arms in their sockets. Finding those knots still as tight as he had left them, Bayar pulled at his ankle rope, scraping him across the rocky ground. The man looked too skeletal to have any strength, but Perrin might as well have been a child. It was a nightly routine. As Bayar straightened, Perrin saw that Egwene was still asleep. Wake up, he shouted. Egwene, wake up. What? Egwene's voice was frightened and still thick with sleep. She lifted her head, blinking in the lantern light. Bayar gave no sign of disappointment at not being able to kick her awake. He never did. He jerked at her ropes the same way he had Perrin's, ignoring her groans. Causing pain was another of those things that seemed not to affect him one way or another. Perrin was the only one he really went out of his way to hurt. Even if Perrin could not remember it, Bayar remembered that he had killed two of the children. Why should dark friends sleep? Bayar said dispassionately, when decent men must stay awake to guard them. For the 100th time, Egwene said wearily, we aren't dark friends. Perrin tensed. Sometimes such a denial brought a lecture delivered in a grating near monotone on confession and repentance, leading into a description of the questioner's methods of obtaining them. Sometimes it brought the lecture and a kick. To his surprise, this time Bayar ignored it. Instead, the man squatted in front of him, all angles and sunken hollows with the axe across his knees. The golden sun on his cloak's left breast and the two golden stars beneath it glittered in the lantern light. Taking off his helmet, he set it beside the lantern. For a change, there was something besides disdain or hatred on his face, something intent and unreadable. He rested his arms on the axe handle and studied Perrin silently. Perrin tried not to shift under that hollow-eyed stare. You're slowing us down, dark friend, you and your wolves. The Council of the Anointed has heard reports of such things, and they want to know more. So you must be taken to Amador and given to the questioners. But you are slowing us down. I had hoped we could move fast enough, even without the remounts. But I was wrong. He fell silent, frowning at them.
Do some
Perrin
dabs.
waited. Bayar would tell him when he was ready. The Lord Captain is caught in a cleft of a dilemma, Bayar said finally. Because of the wolves, he must take you to the council. But he must reach Camelin, too. We have no spare horses to carry you, but if we continue to let you walk, we will not reach Camelin by the appointed time. The Lord Captain sees his duties with a single-minded vision, and he intends to see you before the council. Egwene made a sound. Bayar was staring at Perrin, and he stared back, almost afraid to blink. I don't understand, he said slowly. There is nothing to understand, Bayar replied. Nothing but idle speculation. If you escaped, we would not have time to track you down. We don't have an hour to spare if we are to reach Camelin in time. If you frayed your ropes on a sharp rock, say, and vanished into the night, the Lord Captain's problem would be solved. Never taking his gaze from Perrin, he reached under his cloak and tossed something on the ground. Automatically, Perrin's eyes followed it. When he realized what it was, he gasped. A rock. A split rock with a sharp edge. Just idle speculation, Bayar said. Your guards tonight also speculate. Perrin's mouth was suddenly dry. Think it through. Light help me think it through and don't make any mistakes. Could it be true? Could the White Cloaks need to get to Camelin quickly be important enough for this? Letting suspected dark friends escape? There was no use trying that way. He did not know enough. Bayar was the only White Cloak who would talk to them aside from Lord Captain Bornhold, and neither was exactly free with information. Another way. If Bayar wanted them to escape, why not simply cut their bonds? If Bayar wanted them to escape, Bayar, who was convinced to his marrow that they were dark friends. Bayar, who hated dark friends worse than he did the Dark One himself. Bayar, who looked for any excuse to cause him pain because he had killed 2 White Cloaks. Bayar wanted them to escape. If he had thought his mind was racing before, now it sped like an avalanche. Despite the cold, sweat ran down his face in rivulets. He glanced at the guards. They were only shadows of pale gray, but it seemed to him that they were poised, waiting. If he and Egwene were killed trying to escape and their ropes had been cut on a rock that could have been lying there by chance, the Lord Captain's dilemma would be solved all right, and Bayar would have them dead the way he wanted. The gaunt man picked up his helmet from beside the lantern and started to stand. Wait, Perrin said hoarsely. His thoughts tumbled over and over as he searched in vain for some way out. Wait. I want to talk. Help comes. The thought blossomed in his mind, a clear burst of light in the midst of chaos, so startling that for a moment he forgot everything else, even where he was. Dapple was alive. Elias. He thought at the wolf, demanding without words to know if the man was alive. An image came back. Elias lying on a bed of evergreen branches beside a small fire in a cave, tending a wound in his side. It all took only an instant. He gaped at Bayar and his face broke into a foolish grin. Elias was alive. Dapple was alive. Help was coming. Bayar paused, risen only to a crouch, looking at him. Some thought has come to you, Perrin of the 2 Rivers, and I would know what it is. For a moment, Perrin thought he meant the thought from Dapple. Panic fled across his face, followed by relief. Bayar could not possibly know. Bayar watched his changes of expression, and for the first time, the White Cloak's eyes went to the rock he had tossed on the ground. He was reconsidering, Perrin realized. If he changed his mind about the rock, would he dare risk leaving him alive to talk? Ropes could be frayed after the people wearing them were dead, even if it made for risk of discovery. He looked into Bayar's eyes. The shadowed hollows of the man's eye sockets made them appear to stare at him from dark caves. And he saw death decided. Bayar opened his mouth, and as Perrin waited for sentence to be pronounced, things began to happen too fast for thought. Suddenly, one of the guards vanished. 1 minute, there were 2 dim shapes. The next, the night swallowed one of them. The second guard turned, the beginning of a cry on his lips. But before the first syllable was uttered, there was a solid ka-chunk, and he toppled over like a felled tree. Bayar spun, swift as a striking viper, the axe whirling in his hands so fast that it hummed. Perrin's eyes bulged as the night seemed to flow into the lantern light. His mouth opened to yell, but his throat locked tight with fear. For an instant, he even forgot that Byre wanted to kill them. The White Cloak was another human being, and the night had come alive to take them all. Then the darkness invading the light became Lan, cloak swirling through shades of gray and black as he moved. The axe in Byre's hand lashed out like lightning, and Lan seemed to lean casually aside, letting the blade pass so close he must have felt the wind of it. Byre's eyes widened as the force of his blow carried him off balance, as the water struck him with hands and feet in rapid succession, so quick that Perrin was not sure what he had just seen. What he was sure of was Byre collapsing like a puppet. Before the falling White Cloak had finished settling to the ground, the warder was on his knees extinguishing the lantern. In the sudden return to darkness, Perrin stared blindly. Lan seemed to have vanished again. Is it really? Egwene gave a stifled sob. We thought you were dead. We thought you were all dead. Not yet. The warder's deep whisper was tinged with amusement. Hands touched Perrin, found his bonds. A knife sliced through the ropes with barely a tug, and he was free. Aching muscles protested as he sat up. Rubbing his wrists, he peered at the graying mound that marked Byre. Is he? No. Lan's voice answered quietly from the darkness. I do not kill unless I need to. But he won't bother anyone for a while.
Just picking a couple movies
Stop asking
to
questions and get a pair of their clothes.
download
We
for
do not have much time. Perrin crawled to where Byre lay.
or
It took an
Saturday.
effort to touch the man, and when he felt the White Cloak's chest rising and falling, he almost jerked his hands away. His skin crawled as he made himself unfasten the White Cloak and pull it off. Despite what Lan said, he could imagine the skull-faced man suddenly rearing up. Hastily, he fumbled around till he found his axe, then crawled to another guard. It seemed strange at first that he felt no reluctance to touch this unconscious man, but the reason came to him. All the White Cloaks hated him, but that was a human emotion. Byre felt nothing beyond that he should die. There was no hate in it, no emotion at all. Gathering the two cloaks in his arms, he turned, and panic grabbed him. In the darkness, he suddenly had no sense of direction, about to find his way back to Lan and the others. His feet rooted to the ground, afraid to move. Even Byre was hidden by the night without his White Cloak. There was nothing by which to orient himself. Any way he went might be out into the camp. Here. He stumbled toward Lan's whisper until hands stopped him. Egwene was a dim shadow and Lan's face was a blur. The rest of the warders seemed not to be there at all. He could feel their eyes on him, and he wondered if he should explain. Put on the cloaks, Lan said softly. Quickly. Bundle your own, and make no sound. You aren't safe yet. Hurriedly, Perrin passed one of the cloaks to Egwene, relieved at being safe from having to tell of his fear. He made his own cloak into a bundle to carry, and swung the White Cloak around his shoulders in its place. He felt a prickle as it settled around his shoulders, a stab of worry between his shoulder blades. Was it Byre's cloak he had ended up with? He almost thought he could smell the gaunt man on it. Lan directed them to hold hands, and Perrin gripped his axe in one hand and Egwene's hand with the other, wishing the warder would get on with their escape so he could stop his imagination from running wild. But they just stood there, surrounded by the tents of the children, two shapes in white cloaks, and one that was sensed but not seen. Soon, Lan whispered. Very soon. Lightning broke the night above the camp, so close that Perrin felt the hair in his arms, his head lifting as the bolt charged the air. Just beyond the tents, the earth erupted from the blow, the explosion on the ground merging with that in the sky. Before the light faded, Lan was leading them forward. At their first step, another strike sliced open the blackness. Lightning came like hail, so that the night flickered as if the darkness were coming in momentary flashes. Thunder drummed wildly, one roar rumbling into the next, one continuous rippling peal. Fear-stricken horses screamed, their whinnies drowned except for moments when the thunder faded. Men tumbled out of their tents, some in their white cloaks, some only half-clothed, some dashing to and fro, some standing as if stunned. Through the middle of it, Lan pulled them at a trot, Perrin bringing up the rear. White cloaks looked at them, wild-eyed, as they passed. A few shouted at them, the shouts lost in the pounding from the heavens, but with their white cloaks gathered around them, no one tried to stop them. through the tents, out of the camp, and into the night, and no one raised a hand against them. The ground turned uneven under Perrin's feet, and brush slapped at him as he let himself be drawn along. The lightning flickered fitfully and was gone. Echoes of thunder rolled across the sky before they too faded away. Perrin looked over his shoulder. A handful of fires burned back there among the tents. Some of the lightning must have struck home, or perhaps men had knocked over lamps in their panic. Men still shouted, voices tiny in the night, trying to restore order, to find out what had happened. The lamp began to slope upwards, and tents and fires and shouting were left behind. Suddenly he almost trod on Egwene's heels as Lan stopped. Ahead in the moonlight stood 3 horses. A shadow stirred and Moraine's voice came, weighted with irritation. Nynaeve has not returned. I fear that young woman has done something foolish. Lan spun on his heel as if to return the way they had come, but a single whip-crack word from Moraine halted him. No. He stood looking at her sideways, only his face and hands truly visible, and they but dimly shadowed blurs. She went on in a gentler tone, gentler but no less firm. Some things are more important than others, you know that. The warder did not move, and her voice hardened again. Remember your oaths, Alan Mandragoran, Lord of the Seven Towers? What of the oath of a diademed battle lord of the Malkiri? Perrin blinked. Lan was all of that. Egwene was murmuring, but he could not take his eyes off the tableau in front of him. Lan standing like a wolf from Dapple's pack, a wolf at bay before the diminutive Aes Sedai, and vainly seeking escape from doom. The frozen scene was broken by a crash of breaking branches in the woods. In 2 long strides, Lan was between Moraine and the sound, the pale moonlight rippling along his sword. To the crackle and snap of underbrush, a pair of horses burst from the trees, one with a rider. Bella! Egwene exclaimed at the same time that Nynaeve said from the shaggy mare's back, I almost didn't find you again. Egwene, thank the light you're alive. She slid down off Bella, but as she started toward the Emmonsfielders, Lan caught her arm, and she stopped short, staring up at him. We must go, Lan, Moraine said, once more sounding unruffled, and the warder released his grip. Nynaeve rubbed her arm as she hurried to hug Egwene, but Perrin thought he heard her give a low laugh, too. It puzzled him because he did not think it had anything to do with her happiness at seeing them again. Where are Rand and Mat? He asked. Elsewhere, Moraine replied, and Nynaeve muttered something in a sharp tone that made Egwene gasp. Perrin blinked. He had caught the edge of a wagoneer's oath, and a coarse one. The lights send they are well, the Aes Sedai went on, as if she had not noticed. We will none of us be well, Lan said, if the White Cloaks find us. Change your cloaks and get mounted. Perrin scrambled up onto the horse Nynaeve had brought behind Bella. The lack of a saddle did not hamper him. He did not ride often at home, but when he did, it was more likely bareback than not. He still carried the white cloak, now rolled up and tied to his belt. The warder said they must leave no more traces for the children to find than they could help. He still thought he could smell briar on it. As they started out, the warder leading on his tall black stallion, Perrin felt Dapple's touch on his mind once more. One day again. More of feeling than words, it sighed with the promise of a meeting foreordained, with anticipation of what was to come, with resignation to what was to come, all streaked in layers. He tried to ask when and why, fumbling in his haste and sudden fear. The trace of the wolves grew fainter, fading. His frantic questions brought only the same heavy-laden answer. One day again. It hung haunting in his mind long after awareness of the wolves winked out. Lan pressed southward slowly but steadily. The night-draped wilderness, all rolling ground and underbrush hidden until it was underfoot, shadowed trees thick against the sky, allowed no great speed in any case. Twice the warder left them, riding back toward the slivered moon, he and Mondar becoming one with the night behind. Both times he returned to report no sign of pursuit. Egwene stayed close beside Nynaeve. Soft-spoken scraps of excited talk floated back to Perrin. Those two were as buoyed up as if they had found home again. He hung back at the tail of their little column. Sometimes the wisdom turned in her saddle to look back at him, and each time he gave her a wave as if to say that he was all right. and stayed where he was. He had a lot to think about, though he could not get any of it straight in his head. What was to come? What was to come? Baron thought it could not be much short of dawn when Moraine finally called a halt. Lan found a gully where he could build a fire hidden within a hollow in one of the banks. Finally, they were allowed to rid themselves of the white cloaks, burying them in a hole dug near the fire. As he was about to toss in the cloak he had used, the embroidered golden sun on the breast caught his eye, and the 2 golden stars beneath. He dropped the cloak as if it stung and walked away, scrubbing his hands on his coat to sit alone. Now, Egwene said, once Lan was shoveling dirt into the hole, will somebody tell me where Rand and Mat are? I believe they are in Camelin, Moraine said carefully, or on their way there. Nynaeve gave a loud, disparaging grunt, but the Aes Sedai went on as if she had not been interrupted. If they are not, I will yet find them. That I promise. They made a quiet meal on bread and cheese and hot tea. Even Egwene's enthusiasm succumbed to weariness. The wisdom produced an ointment from her bag for the wheals the ropes had left on Egwene's wrists, and a different one for her other bruises. When she came to where Perrin sat on the edge of the firelight, he did not look up.
Got that stuff
She stood looking at him silently for a
downloading.
time, then squatted with her bag beside her, saying
Okay.
briskly, "Take your coat and shirt off, Perrin. They tell me one of the white cloaks took a dislike to you." He complied slowly, still half lost
Empire
in
Strikes
Dapple's
Back, that's a
message,
good
until
one.
Nynaeve gasped.
And what's funny
Startled,
is
he stared at her. Then at
that's
his
one of
own
the ones
bare
I
chest.
downloaded was Blood In,
It
Blood
was a
Out,
massive color. The
because
newer purple
on
blotches
Hulu they
overlaying
have
older
Blood In,
ones
Blood
faded
Out
into
on there.
shades of brown
It's the
and yellow.
director's cut.
Only
It's like
thick
3
slabs of
hours
muscle
long.
earned by hours at Master
So I'll
Luron's
take a
forge
good
had
portion
saved him
of the
from
night.
broken ribs.
I might
With his mind filled by
download the
wolves, he
original
had managed to
trilogy
forget
of
the
the
pain.
Star Wars.
But he was
That'd
reminded
be
of
a
it
good
now.
one to
It came
pass
back
time
gladly.
too.
Involuntarily, he took a deep breath and clamped
It was
his lips on
funny.
a groan.
We actually got that on
How could he have disliked you so much?
DVD in our
Nynaeve asked
collection. We
wonderingly.
got Blood In, Blood
I
Out,
killed 2 men.
American Me,
Aloud, he said,
what was
I
that
don't
one?
know.
La
He
Vida
rummaged in her
Loca.
bag, and he flinched when she began spreading a greasy
The only
ointment
other one
over
we
his
need to get
bruises.
for at least a collection that falls in
Round
that
Aggie,
category would be
Firefinger, and Sunburst Root, she said.
Boulevard Nights.
It was hot and cold at the same time, making him shiver while he
Just do a
broke into a
dab.
sweat. But he did not protest. He had had experience of Nynaeve's ointments and poultices before. As her fingers gently rubbed the mixture in, the heat and cold vanished, taking the pain with them. The purple splotches faded to brown, and the brown and yellow paled, some disappearing altogether. Experimentally, he took a deep breath. There was barely a twinge. You look surprised, Nynaeve said. She looked a little surprised herself and strangely frightened. Next time you can go to her. Not surprised, he said soothingly. Just glad. Sometimes Nynaeve's ointments worked fast and sometimes slow, but they always worked. What happened to Rand and Mat? Nynaeve began stuffing her vials and pots back into her bag, jamming each one in as if she were thrusting it through a barrier. She says they're all right. She says we'll find them. In Camelin, she says. She says it's too important for us not to, whatever that means. She says a great many things. Perrin grinned in spite of himself. Whatever else had changed, the wisdom was still herself, and she and the Aes Sedai were still far from fast friends. Abruptly, Nynaeve stiffened, staring at his face. Dropping her bag, she pressed the backs of her hands to his cheeks and forehead. He tried to pull back, but she caught his head in both hands and thumbed back his eyelids, peering into his eyes and muttering to herself. Despite her small size, she held his face easily. It was never easy to get away from Nynaeve when she did not want you to. I don't understand, releasing him and setting back on her heels. If it was yellow eye fever, you wouldn't be able to stand. But you don't have any fever, and the whites of your eyes aren't yellowed, just the irises. Yellow, Moraine said. And they both jumped where they sat. The Aes Sedai's approach had been utterly silent. Egwene was asleep by the fire, wrapped in her cloak, Perrin saw. His own eyelids wanted to slide closed. It isn't anything, he said. Moraine put a hand under his chin and turned his face up so she could peer into his eyes the way Nynaeve had. He jerked away, prickling. The two women were handling him as if he were a child. I said it isn't anything. There was no foretelling this. Moraine spoke as if to herself. Her eyes seemed to look at something beyond it. Something ordained to be woven, or a change in the pattern. If a change, by what hand? The wheel weaves as the wheel wills. It must be that. Do you know what it is? Nynaeve asked reluctantly, then hesitated. Can you do something for him? You're healing. The admission that she could do nothing came out of her as if dragged. Perrin glared at both the women. If you're going to talk about me, talk to me. I'm sitting right here. Neither looked at him. Healing? Moraine smiled. Healing can do nothing about this. It is not an illness, and it will not. She hesitated briefly. She did glance at Perrin, then a quick look that regretted many things. The look did not include him, though, and he muttered sourly as she turned back to Nynaeve. I was going to say it will not harm him, but who can say what the end will be? At least I can say it will not harm him directly. Nynaeve stood, dusting off her knees, and confronted the Aes Sedai eye to eye. That's not good enough. If there's something wrong with what is. What is woven already is past changing. Moraine turned away abruptly. We must sleep while we can and leave at first light. If the Dark One's hand grows too strong, we must reach Caemlyn quickly. Angrily, Nynaeve snatched up her bag and stalked off before Perrin could speak. He started to growl an oath, but a thought hit him like a blow, and he sat there gaping silently. Moraine. The Aes Sedai knew about the wolves, and she thought it could be the Dark One's doing. A shiver ran through him. Hastily, he shrugged back into his shirt, tucking it in awkwardly, and pulled his coat and cloak back on. The clothing did not help very much. He felt chilled right down to his bones, his marrow like frozen jelly. Lan dropped to the ground, cross-legged, tossing back his cloak. Perrin was glad of that. It was unpleasant looking at the warder and having his eyes slide past. For a long moment, they simply stared at one another. The hard planes of the warder's face were unreadable, but in his eyes, Perrin thought he saw something. Sympathy, curiosity, both. You know, he said, and Lan nodded. I know some, not all. Did it just come to you, or did you meet a guide, an intermediary? There was a man, Perrin said slowly. He knows. But does he think the same as Moraine? He said his name was Elias. Elias Machira. Lan drew a deep breath, and Perrin looked at him sharply. You know him? I knew him. He taught me much about the Blight and about this. Lan touched his sword hilt. He was a warder before what happened. The Red Aja. He glanced where Moraine was, lying before the fire. It was the first time Perrin could remember any uncertainty in the warrior. At Shadar Logoth, Lan had been sure and strong, and when he was facing Fades and Trollocs. He was not afraid now, Perrin was convinced of that. But he was wary, as if he might say too much, as if what he said could be dangerous. I've heard of the Red Aja, he told Lan. And most of what you've heard is wrong, no doubt. You must understand there are factions within Tar Valon. Some would fight the Dark One way, some another. The goal is the same, but the differences can mean lives changed or ended. The lives of men or nations. He is well, Elias? I think so. The white bloke said they killed him. But Dapple... Perrin glanced at the water uncomfortably. I don't know. Lan seemed to accept that he did not, reluctantly, and it emboldened him to go on. This communicating with the wolves. Moraine seems to think it's something Something the Dark One did. It isn't, is it? You would not believe Elias was a dark friend. But Lan hesitated and sweat started on Perrin's face. Chill beads made colder by the night. They were sliding down his cheeks by the time the warder spoke. Not in itself, no. Some believe it is, but they are wrong. It was old and lost long before the Dark One was found. But what of the chance involved, blacksmith? Sometimes the pattern has a randomness to it, to our eyes at least. But what chance that you should meet a man who could guide you in this thing, and you one who could follow the guiding? The pattern is forming a great web, what some call the lace of ages. You lads are central to it. I don't think there is much chance left in your lives now. Have you been chosen out then? And if so, by the light or by the shadow? The Dark One can't touch us unless we name him. Immediately, Perrin thought of the dreams of Baalzamon, the dreams that were more than dreams. He scrubbed the sweat off his face. He can't. Rock hard stubborn, the warder mused. Maybe stubborn enough to save yourself in the end. Remember the times we live in, blacksmith. Remember what Moraine said I told you. In these times, many things are dissolving and breaking apart. Old barriers weaken. Old walls crumble. The barriers between what is and what was, between what is and what will be. His voice turned grim. The walls of the Dark One's prison. This may be the end of an age. We may see a new age born before we die. Or perhaps it is the end of ages, the end of time itself, the end of the world. Suddenly he grinned, but his grin was as dark as a scowl. His eyes sparkled merrily, laughing at the foot of the gallows. But that's not for us to worry about, eh, blacksmith? We'll fight the shadow as long as we have breath. And if it overruns us, we'll go under biting and clawing. You two Rivers folk are too stubborn to surrender. Don't you worry whether the Dark One has stirred in your life. You are back among friends now. Remember, the wheel weaves as the wheel wills. And even the Dark One cannot change that. Not with Moraine to watch over you. We had better find your friends soon. What do you mean? They have no Aes Sedai touching the true source to protect them. Blacksmith, perhaps the walls have weakened enough for the Dark One himself to touch events. Not with a free hand, or we'd be done already. It may be tiny shiftings in the threads. A chance turning of one corner instead of another. A chance meeting. A chance word. Or what seems like chance. They could be so far under the shadow, not even Moraine could bring them back. We have to find them, Perrin said, and the warder gave a grunt of a laugh. What have I been saying? Get some sleep, blacksmith. Lan's cloak swung back around him as he stood. In the faint light from fire and moon, he seemed almost part of the shadows beyond. We have a hard few days to Camelin. Just you pray we find them there. But Moraine, she can find them anywhere, can't she? She says she can. But can't she find them in time? If the Dark One is strong enough to take a hand himself, time is running out. You pray we find them in Camelin, blacksmith. We may all be lost. Chapter 39. Weaving of the Web. Rand looked down on the crowds from the high window of his room in the Queen's Blessing. They ran shouting along the street, all streaming in the same direction, waving pennants and banners, the white line standing guard in 1,000 fields of red. Cameliners and Outlanders, they ran together, and for a change, no one appeared to want to bash anyone else's head. Today, maybe, there was only one faction. He turned from the window, grinning. Next to the day when Egwene and Perrin walked in, alive and laughing over what they had seen, this was the day he had been waiting for most. Are you coming? He asked again. Matt glowered from where he lay curled up in a ball on his bed. Take that Trolloc you're so friendly with. Blood and ashes, Matt. He's not a Trolloc. You're just being stubborn stupid. How many times do you want to have this argument? Light, it's not as if you'd never heard of Ogier before. I never heard they look like Trollocs. Matt pushed his face into his pillow and curled himself tighter. Stubborn stupid, Rand muttered. How long are you going to hide up here? I'm not going to keep bringing you your meals up all those stairs forever. You could do with a bath, too. Matt shrugged around on the bed as if he were trying to burrow deeper into it. Rand sighed, then went to the door. Last chance to go together, Matt. I'm leaving now. He closed the door slowly, hoping that Matt would change his
Had
mind.
to recover from
But
that
his friend did not stir.
that dab, and then we'll
The door
start
clicked
round
shut.
2.
In the hallway, he leaned against the door frame. Master Gill said there was an old woman 2 streets over, Mother Grubb, who sold herbs and poultices besides birthing babies, tending the sick, and telling fortunes. She sounded a little like a wisdom. Nynaeve was who Matt needed, or maybe Moraine, but Mother Grubb was who he had. Bringing her to the Queen's blessing might bring the wrong kind of attention as well, though, if she would even come. For her, as well as for Matt and him. Herbalists and hedge doctors were lying low in Camelin right now. There was talk against anyone who did any kind of healing or fortune-telling. Every night, the Dragon's Fang was scrawled on doors with a free hand, sometimes even in the daylight. And people might forget who had cured their fevers and poulticed their toothaches when the cry of Dark Friend went up. That was the temper in the city. It was not as if Matt were really sick. He ate everything Rand carried up from the kitchen. He would take nothing from anyone else's hand, though, and never complained about aches or fever. He just refused to leave the room. But Rand had been sure today would bring him out. He settled his cloak on his shoulders and hitched his sword belt around so the sword, and the red cloth wrapped around it, was covered more. At the foot of the stairs, he met Master Gill just starting up. There's someone been asking after you in the city, the innkeeper said around his pipe. Rand felt a surge of hope. Asking after you and those friends of yours by name. You younglings, anyway. Seems to want you 3 lads most. Anxiety replaced hope. Who? Rand asked. He still could not help glancing up and down the hall. Except for they two, it was empty. He exited into the alley to the common room door. Don't know his name. Just heard about him. I hear most things in Camelin eventually. Beggar, the innkeeper grunted. Not mad, I hear. Even so, he could take the Queen's bounty at the palace, even with things as hard as they are. On high days, the Queen gives it out with her own hands, and there's never anyone turned away for any reason. No one needs to beg in Camelin. Even a man under warrant can't be arrested while he's taking the Queen's bounty. The Dark Friend? Rand said reluctantly. If the Dark Friends know our names. You've got Dark Friends on the brain, young fellow. They're around, certainly, but just because the White Cloaks have everybody stirred up, there's no reason for you to think the city's full of them. Do you know what rumor those idiots have started now? Strange shapes. Can you believe it? Strange shapes creeping around outside the city in the night. The innkeeper chuckled till his belly shook. Rand did not feel like laughing. I and Kinch had talked about strange shapes, and there had surely enough been a fade back there. What kind of shapes? What kind? I don't know what kind. Strange shapes. Trollocs, probably. The Shadowman. Lou's Baron Kinslayer himself, come back 50 feet high. What kind of shapes do you think people will imagine now the idea's in their heads? It's none of our worry. Master Gill eyed him for a moment. Going out, are you? Well, I can't say I care for it myself, even today. But there's hardly anybody left here but me. Not your friend? Matt's not feeling very well. Maybe later. Well, be that as it may. You watch yourself now. Even today, good Queen's men will be outnumbered out there. Like burn the day I ever thought to see it so. Best you leave by the alleyway. There's 2 of those blood-bedamned traitors sitting across the street watching my front door. They know where I stand by the light. Rand stuck his head out and looked both ways before slipping into the alley. A bulky man Master Gill had hired stood at the head of the alley, leaning on his spear and watching the people run past with an apparent lack of interest. It was only apparent, Rand knew. The fellow, his name was Lamgwin, saw everything through those heavy-lidded eyes, and for all his bullish bulk, he could move like a cat. He also thought Queen Morgaze was the light made flesh, or near enough. There were a dozen like him scattered around the Queen's blessing. Lamgwin's ear twitched when Rand reached the mouth of the alley, but he never took his disinterest off the street. Rand knew the man had heard him coming. "Watch your back today, man." Lamgwin's voice sounded like gravel in a pan. "When the trouble starts, you'll be a handy one to have here. Not somewhere with a knife in your back." Rand glanced at the blocky man, but his surprise was muted. He always tried to keep the sword out of sight, but this was not the first time one of Master Gill's men had assumed he would know his way in a fight. Lamgwin did not look back at him. The man's job was guarding the inn, and he did it. Pushing his sword back a little further under his cloak, Rand joined the flow of people. He saw the two men the innkeeper had mentioned, standing on upturned barrels across the street from the inn so they could see over the crowd. He did not think they noticed him coming out of the alley. They made no secret of their allegiance. Not only were their swords wrapped in white tied with red, they wore white armbands and white cockades on their hats. He had not been in Camelin long before learning that red wrappings on a sword or a red armband or cockade meant support for Queen Morgaze. White said the Queen and her involvement with Aes Sedai and Tar Valon were to blame for everything that had gone wrong. For the weather and the failed crops. Maybe even for the false dragon. He did not want to get involved in Camelin politics. Only it was too late now. It was not just that he had already chosen, by accident, but there it was. Matters in the city had gone beyond letting anyone stay neutral. Even outlanders wore cockades and armbands, or wrapped their swords, and more wore the white than the red. Maybe some of them did not think that way, but they were far from home, and that was the way sentiment was running in Camelin. Men who supported the Queen went about in groups for their own protection, when they went out at all. Today, though, it was different. On the surface, at least. Today, Camelin celebrated a victory of the light over the shadow. Today, the false dragon was being brought into the city to be displayed before the Queen, before he was taken north to Tar Valon. No one talked about that part of it. No one but the Aes Sedai could deal with a man who could actually wield the one power, of course, but no one wanted to talk about it. The light had defeated the shadow, and soldiers from Andor had been in the forefront of the battle. For today, that was all that was important. For today, everything else could be forgotten. Or could it? Rand wondered. The crowd ran, singing and waving banners, laughing. But men displaying the red kept together in knots of 10 or 20, and there were no women or children with them. He thought there were at least 10 men showing white for every one proclaiming allegiance to the Queen. Not for the first time he wished white cloth had been the cheaper. Or would Master Gill have helped if he'd been showing the white? The crowd was so thick that jostling was inevitable. Even white cloaks did not enjoy their little open spaces in the throng today. As Rand let the crowd carry him toward the inner city, he realized that not all animosities were being reined in. He saw one of the children of the light, one of 3, bumped so hard he almost fell. The white cloak barely caught himself and started an angry oath at the man who had bumped him when another man staggered him with a deliberate, aimed shoulder. Before matters could go any further, the white cloak's companions pulled him over to the side of the street to where they could shelter in a doorway. The 3 seemed caught between their normal glaring stare and disbelief. The crowd streamed on by as if none had noticed, and perhaps none had. No one would have dared do such a thing 2 days earlier. More, Rand realized, the men who had done the bumping wore white cockades on their hats. It was widely believed the white cloaks supported those who opposed the Queen and her Aes Sedai advisor, but that made no difference. Men were doing things of which they had never before thought. Jostling a white cloak today, tomorrow perhaps pulling down a Queen. Suddenly he wished there were a few more men close to him showing red. Jostled by white cockades and armbands, he abruptly felt very alone. The white cloaks noticed him looking at them and stared back as if meeting a challenge. He let a singing swirl in the crowd sweep him out of their sight and joined in their song. Forward the lion, forward the lion. The white lion takes the field. Roar defiance at the shadow, forward the lion. Forward Andor triumphant. The route that would bring the false dragon into Camelin was well known. Those streets themselves were kept clear by solid lines of the Queen's guards and red-cloaked pikemen, but people packed the edges of them shoulder to shoulder, even the windows and the rooftops. Rand worked his way into the inner city, trying to get closer to the palace. He had some thought of actually seeing Logain displayed before the queen. To see the false dragon and the queen, both. That was something he had never dreamed of back home. The inner city was built on hills, and much of what the Ogier had made still remained. Where streets in the new city mostly ran every which way in a crazy quilt, here they followed the curves of the hills as if they were a natural part of the earth. Sweeping rises and dips presented new and surprising vistas at every turn. Parks seen from different angles, even from above, where their walls and monuments made patterns pleasing to the eye, though barely touched with green. Towers suddenly revealed, tile-covered walls glittering in the sunlight with 100 changing colors. Sudden rises where the gaze was thrown out across the entire city to the rolling plains and forests beyond. All in all, it would have been something to see, if not for the crowd that hurried him along before he had a chance to really take it in. And all those curving streets made it impossible to see very far ahead. Abruptly, he was swept around a bend. There was the palace. The streets, even following the natural contours of the land, have been laid out to spiral in on this. This gleeman's tale of pale spires and golden domes and intricate stonework traceries, with the banner of Andor waving from every prominence, a centerpiece for which all the other vistas had been designed. It seemed more sculpted by an artist than simply built like ordinary buildings. That glimpse showed him he would get no nearer. No one was being allowed close to the palace. Queen's guards made scarlet ranks 10 deep flanking the palace gates. Along the tops of the white walls, on high balconies and towers, more guards stood rigidly straight, bows precisely slanted across the breastplated chests. They, too, looked like something out of a Gleeman's tale, a guard of honor. But Rand did not believe that was why they were there. The clamoring crowd lining the streets was almost solid with white-wrapped swords, white armbands, and white cockades. Only here and there was the white wall broken by a knot of red. The red uniformed guards seemed a thin barrier against all that white. Giving up on making his way closer to the palace, he sought a place where he could use his height to advantage. He did not have to be in the front row to see everything. The crowd shifted constantly, people shoving to get nearer the front, people hurrying off to what they thought was a better vantage point. In one of those shifts, he found himself only 3 people from the open street, and all in front of him were shorter than he, including the pikemen. Almost everyone was. People crowded against him from both sides, sweating from the press of so many bodies. Those behind him muttered about not being able to see and tried to wriggle past. He stood his ground, making an impervious wall with those to either side. He was
I'll be
content.
right back.
When the false dragon passed by, he would be close enough to see the man's face clearly.
Then we'll start
Across the
around.
street and down toward the gates to the new city, a ripple passed through the tight-packed crowd. Round the curve, an eddy of people was drawing back to let something go by. It was not like the clear space that followed the white cloaks on any day but today. These people jerked themselves back with startled glances that became grimaces of distaste. Pressing themselves out of the way, they turned their faces from whatever it was, but watched out of the corners of their eyes until it was past. Other eyes around him noted the disturbance too. Keyed for the coming of the dragon, but with nothing to do now but wait, the crowd found anything at all worthy of comment. He heard speculation ranging from an Aes Sedai to Logain himself, and a few coarser suggestions that brought rough laughter from the men and disdainful sniffs from the women. The ripple meandered through the crowd, drawing closer to the edge of the street as it came. No one seemed to hesitate in letting it go where it wanted, even if that meant losing a good spot for viewing as the crowd flowed back in on itself behind the passing. Finally, directly across from Rand, the crowd bulged into the street, pushing aside red-cloaked pikemen who struggled to shove them back, and broke open. The stooped shape that shuffled hesitantly out into the open looked more like a pile of filthy rags than a man. Rand heard murmurs of disgust around him. The ragged man paused on the far edge of the street. His cowl, torn and stiff with dirt, swung back and forth as if searching for something, or listening. Abruptly, he gave a wordless cry and flung out a dirty claw of a hand, pointing straight at Rand. Immediately, he began to scuttle across the street like a bug. The beggar. Whatever ill chance had led the man to find him like this, Rand was suddenly sure that, dark friend or not, he did not want to meet him face to face. He could feel the beggar's eyes like greasy water on his skin. Especially he did not want the man close to him here, surrounded by people balanced on the brink of violence. The same voices that had laughed before now cursed him as he pushed his way back, away from the street. He hurried, knowing the densely packed mass through which he had to shove and wriggle would give way before the filthy man. Struggling to force a path through the crowd, he staggered and almost fell when he abruptly broke free. Flailing his arms to keep his balance, he turned the stagger into a run. People pointed at him. He was the only one not pressing the other way, and running at that. Shouts followed him. His cloak flapped behind him, exposing his red-clad sword. When he realized that, he ran faster. A lone supporter of the Queen, running could well spark a white-cockaded mob to pursuit, even today. He ran, letting his long legs eat paving stones. Not until the shouts were left far behind did he allow himself to collapse against a wall, panting. He did not know where he was, except that he was still within the inner city. He could not remember how many twists and turns he had taken along those curving streets. Poised to run again, he looked back the way he had come. Only one person moved on the street, a woman walking placidly along with her shopping basket. Almost everyone in the city was gathered for a glimpse of the false dragon. He can't have followed me. I must have left him behind. The beggar would not give up. He was sure of it, though he could not say why. That ragged shape would be working its way through the crowds at that very minute, searching. And if Rand returned to see Logain, he ran the risk of a meeting. For a moment he considered going back to the Queen's blessing, but he was sure he would never get another chance to see a queen, and he hoped he would never have another to see a false dragon. There seemed to be something cowardly in letting a bent beggar, even a dark friend, chase him into hiding. He looked around, considering. The way the inner city was laid out, buildings were kept low, if there were buildings at all, so that someone standing at a particular spot would have nothing to interrupt the planned view. There had to be places from where he could see the procession pass with the false dragon. Even if he could not see the Queen, he could see Logain. Suddenly determined, he set off. In the next hour he found several such places, every last one already packed cheek to cheek with people avoiding the crush along the procession route. They wore a solid front of white cockades and armbands, no red at all. Thinking what the sight of his sword might do in a crowd like that, he slipped away carefully and quickly. Shouting floated up from the new city, cries and the blaring of trumpets, the martial beat of drums. Logain and his escort were already in Camelin, already on their way to the palace. Dispirited, he wandered the all but empty streets, still half-heartedly hoping to find some way to see Logain. His eyes fell on the slope, bare of buildings, rising above the street where he was walking. In a normal spring, the slope would have been an expanse of flowers and grass. Now it was brown, all the way to the high wall along its crest, a wall over which the tops of trees were visible. This part of the street had not been designed for any grand view, but just ahead, over the rooftops, he could see some of the palace spires topped by white lion banners fluttering in the wind. He was not sure exactly where the curve of the street ran after it rounded the hill beyond his sight, but he suddenly had a thought about that hilltop wall. The drums and trumpets were drawing nearer, the shouting growing louder. Anxiously, he scrambled up the slope. It was not meant to be climbed, but he dug his boots into the dead sod and pulled himself up, using leafless shrubs as handholds. Panting as much with desire as effort, he scrambled the last yards to the wall. It reared above him, easily twice his height and more. The air thundered with the drumbeat, rang with trumpet blasts. The face of the wall had been left much in the natural state of the stone, the huge blocks fitted together so well that the joints were nearly invisible, the roughness making it seem almost a natural cliff. Rand grinned. The cliffs just beyond the sandhills were higher, and even Perrin had climbed those. His hands sought rocky knobs, his booted feet found ridges. The drums raced him as he climbed. He refused to let them win. He would reach the top before they reached the palace. In his haste, the stone tore his hands and scraped his knees through his breeches, but he flung his arms over the top and heaved himself up with a sense of victory. Hastily, he twisted himself around, to a seat on the flat, narrow top of the wall. The leafy branches of a towering tree stuck out over his head, but he had no thought for that. He looked across tiled rooftops, but from the wall his line of sight was clear. He leaned out just a little and could see the palace gate and the Queen's guards drawn up there, and the expectant crowd. Expectant. Their shouts drowned out by the thunder of drums and trumpets, but waiting still. He grinned. I won. Even as he settled in place, the first part of the procession rounded the final curve before the palace. 20 ranks of trumpeters came first, splitting the air with peal after triumphant peal, a fanfare of victory. Behind them, as many drummers thundered. Then came the banners of Cainland, white lions on red, borne by mounted men, followed by the soldiers of Cainland, rank on rank on rank of horsemen, armor gleaming, lances proudly held, crimson pennants fluttering. Treble rows of pikemen and archers flanked them, and came on and on after the horsemen began passing between the waiting guards and through the palace gates. The last of the foot soldiers rounded the curve. Behind them was a massive wagon. 16 horses pulled it in hitches of 4. In the center of its flat bed was a large cage of iron bars, and on each corner of the wagon bed sat 2 women, watching the cage as intently as if the procession and the crowd did not exist. Aes Sedai, he was certain. Between the wagon and the footman, and to either side, rode a dozen warders, their cloaks swirling and tangling the eye. If the Aes Sedai ignored the crowd, the warders scanned it as if there were no other guards but they. With all of that, it was the man in the cage who caught and held Rand's eyes. He was not close enough to see Logain's face, as he wanted to, but suddenly he thought he was as close as he cared for. The false dragon was a tall man with long, dark hair curling around his broad shoulders. He held himself upright against the sway of the wagon with one hand on the bars over his head. His clothes seemed ordinary, a cloak and coat and breeches that would have not caused comment in any farming village. But the way he wore them, the way he held himself, Logain was a king in every inch of him. The cage might as well not have been there. He held himself erect, head high, and looked over the crowd as if they had come to do him honor. And wherever his gaze swept, there the people fell silent, staring back in awe. When Logain's eyes left them, they screamed with redoubled fury as if to make up for their silence, but it made no difference in the way the man stood, or in the silence that passed along with him. As the wagon rolled through the palace gates, he turned to look back at the assembled masses. They howled at him, beyond words, a wave of sheer animal hate and fear, and Logain threw back his head and laughed as the palace swallowed him. Other contingents followed behind the wagons, with banners representing more who had fought and defeated the false dragon. The golden bees of Ilion, the 3 white crescents of Tyr, the rising sun of Carian, others, many others, of nations and of cities, and of great men with their own trumpets, their own drums to thunder their grandeur. It was anticlimactic after Logain. Rand leaned out a bit further to try to catch one last sight of the caged man. He was defeated, wasn't he? Right, he wouldn't be in a bloody cage if he wasn't defeated. Overbalanced, he slipped and grabbed at the top of the wall, pulled himself back to a somewhat safer seat. With Logain gone, he became aware of the burning in his hands, where the stone had scraped his palms and fingers. Yet he could not shake free of the images. The cage and the Aes Sedai. Logain undefeated. No matter the cage, that had not been a defeated man. He shivered and rubbed his stinging hands on his thighs. Why were the Aes Sedai watching him? He wondered aloud. They're keeping him from touching the true source, silly. He jerked to look up toward the girl's voice, and suddenly his precarious seat was gone. He had only time to realize that he was toppling backward, falling, when something struck his head, and a laughing Logain chased him into spinning darkness. Chapter 40. The Web Tightens. It seemed to Rand that he was sitting at table with Logain and Moraine. The Aes Sedai and the false dragon sat watching him silently, as if neither knew the other was there. Abruptly, he realized the walls of the room were becoming indistinct, fading off into gray. A sense of urgency built in him. Everything was going, blurring away. When he looked back to the table, Moraine and Logain had vanished, and Baalzman sat there instead. Rand's whole body vibrated with urgency. It hummed inside his head, louder and louder. The hum became the pounding of blood in his ears. With a jerk, he sat up and immediately groaned and clutched his head, swaying. His whole skull hurt. His left hand found sticky dampness in his hair. He was sitting on the ground on green grass. That troubled him vaguely, but his head spun and everything he looked at lurched. And all he could think of was lying down until it stopped. The wall. The girl's voice. Steadying himself with one hand flat on the grass, he looked around slowly. He had to do it slowly. When he tried to turn his head quickly, everything started whirling again. He was in a garden or a park. A slate-paved walk meandered by through flowering bushes not 6 feet away, with a white stone bench beside it and a leafy arbor over the bench for shade. He had fallen inside the wall. And the girl? He found the tree close behind his back and found her, too, climbing down out of it. She reached the ground and turned to face him, and he blinked and groaned again. A deep blue velvet cloak, lined with pale fur, rested on her shoulders, its hood hanging down behind her waist with a cluster of silver bells at the peak. They jingled when she moved. A silver filigree circlet held her long red gold curls, and delicate silver rings hung at her ears, while a necklace of heavy silver links and dark green stones he thought were emeralds lay around her throat. Her pale blue dress was smudged with bark stains from her tree climbing, but it was still silk, and embroidered with painstakingly intricate designs, the skirt slashed with inserts the color of rich cream. A wide belt of woven silver encircled her waist, and velvet slippers peeked from under the hem of her dress. He had only ever seen 2 women dressed in this fashion, Moraine and the dark friend who had tried to kill Matt and him. He could not begin to imagine who would choose to climb trees in clothes like that, but he was sure she had to be someone important. The way she was looking at him redoubled the impression. She did not seem in the least troubled at having a stranger tumble into her garden. There was a self-possession about her that made him think of Nynaeve or Moraine. He was so enmeshed in worrying whether or not he had gotten himself into trouble, whether or not she was someone who could and would call the Queen's Guard even on a day when they had other things to occupy them, that it took him a few moments to see past the elaborate clothes and lofty attitude to the girl herself. She was perhaps 2 or 3 years younger than he, tall for a girl, and beautiful. Her face a perfect oval framed by that mass of sunburst curls, her lips full and red, her eyes bluer than he could believe. She was completely different from Egwene in height and face and body, but every bit as beautiful. He felt a twinge of guilt, but told himself that denying what his eyes saw would not bring Egwene safely to Camelin one whit faster. A scrabbling sound came from up in the tree, and bits of bark fell, followed by a boy dropping lightly to the ground behind her. He was a head taller than she and a little older, but his face and hair marked him as her close kin. His coat and cloak were red and white and gold, embroidered and brocaded, and for a male, even more ornate than hers. That increased Rand's anxiety. Only on a feast day would any ordinary man dress in anything like that, and never with that much grandeur. This was no public park. Perhaps the guards were too busy to bother with trespassers. The boy studied Rand over the girl's shoulder, fingering the dagger at his waist. It seemed more a nervous habit than any thought that he might use it. Not completely, though. The boy had the same self-possession as the girl, and they both looked at him as if he were a puzzle to be solved. He had the odd feeling that the girl, at least, was cataloging everything about him, from the condition of his boots to the state of his cloak. "We will never hear the end of this, Elaine, if Mother finds out," the boy said suddenly. "She told us to stay in our rooms, but you just had to get a look at Logain, didn't you? Now look what it has got us." "Be quiet, Gawain." She was clearly the younger of the two, but she spoke as though she took it for granted that he would obey. The boy's face struggled as if he had more to say, but to Rand's surprise, he held his peace. "Are you all right?" she said suddenly. It took Rand a minute to realize she was speaking to him. When he did, he tried to struggle to his feet. I'm fine. I just... He tottered, and his legs gave way. He sat back down hard. His head swam. I'll just climb back over the wall, he muttered. He attempted to stand again, but she put her hand on his shoulder, pressing him down. He was so dizzy, the slight pressure was enough to hold him in place. You are hurt. Gracefully, she knelt beside him. Her fingers gently parted the blood-matted hair on the left side of his head. You must have struck a branch coming down. You'll be lucky if you didn't break anything more than your scalp. I don't think I ever saw anyone as skillful at climbing as you. But you don't do so well falling. You'll get blood on your hands, he said, drawing back. Firmly, she pulled his head back to where she could get at it. Hold still. She did not speak sharply, but again there was that note in her voice as if she expected to be obeyed. It does not look too bad, thank the light. From pockets on the inside of her cloak, she began taking out an array of tiny vials and twisted packets of paper, finishing with a handful of wadded bandage. He stared at the collection in amazement. It was the sort of thing he would have expected a wisdom to carry, not someone dressed as she was. She had gotten blood on her fingers, he saw, but it did not seem to bother her. Give me your water flask, Gowan, she said. I need to wash this. The boy she called Gowan unfastened a leather bottle from his belt and handed it to her, then squatted easily at Rand's feet with his arms folded on his knees. Elaine went about what she was doing in a very workmanlike manner. He did not flinch at the sting of cold water when she washed the cut in his scalp, but she held the top of his head with one hand as if she expected him to try to pull away again, and would have none of it. The ointment she smoothed on after, from one of her small vials, soothed almost as much as one of Nynaeve's preparations would have. Gowan smiled at him as she worked, a calming smile, as if he too expected Rand to jerk away and maybe even run. She's always finding stray cats and birds with broken wings. You're the first human being she has had to work on. He hesitated, then added, Do not be offended. I am not calling you a stray. It was not an apology, just a statement of fact. No offense taken, Rand said stiffly. But the pair were acting as if he were a skittish horse. She does know what she is doing, Gowan said. She has had the best teachings, so do not fear, you are in good hands. Elaine pressed some of the bandaging against his temple and pulled the silk scarf from her belt, blue and cream and gold. For any girl in Emmons Field, it would have been a treasured feast day cloth. Elaine deftly began winding it around his head to hold the wad of bandage in place. You can't use that, he protested. She went on winding. I told you to hold still, she said calmly.
Yeah.
Rand looked at Gowan. Does she always expect everybody to do what she tells them? A flash of surprise crossed the young man's face, and his mouth tightened with amusement. Most of the time she does, and most of the time they do. Hold this, Elaine said. Put your hand there while I tie. She exclaimed at the sight of his hands. You did not do that falling. Climbing where you should not have been climbing is more like it. Quickly finishing her knot, she turned his hands palms upward in front of him, muttering to herself about how little water was left. The washing made the lacerations burn, but her touch was surprisingly delicate. Hold still, she said. The vial of ointment was produced again. She spread it thinly along the scrapes, all of her attention apparently on rubbing it in without hurting him. A coolness spread through his hands, as if she were rubbing the torn places away. Most of the time, they do exactly what she says, Gowan went on with an affectionate grin at the top of her head. Most people. Not Mother, of course, or Elida, and not Linny. Linny was her nurse. You can't give orders to someone who switched you for stealing figs when you were little. And even not so little. Elaine raised her head long enough to give him a dangerous look. He cleared his throat and carefully blanked his expression before hurrying on. And Gareth, of course. No one gives orders to Gareth. Not even Mother, Elaine said, bending her head back over Rand's hands. She makes suggestions, and he always does what she suggests. But I've never heard her give him a command. She shook her head. I don't know why that always surprises you, Gowan answered her. Even you don't try telling Garrett what to do. He's served 3 queens and been Captain General and First Prince Regent for 2. I dare say there are some think he's more a symbol of the throne of Andor than the Queen is. Mother should go ahead and marry him, she said absently. Her attention was on Rand's hands. She wants to. She can't hide it from me. And it would solve so many problems. Gowan shook his head. One of them must bend first. Mother cannot, and Garth will not. If she commanded him, he would obey, I think. But she won't. You know she won't. Abruptly, they turned to stare at Rand. He had the feeling they had forgotten he was there. Who? He had to stop to wet his lips. Who is your mother? Elaine's eyes widened in surprise, but Gowan spoke in an ordinary tone that made his words all the more jarring. Mulcahy, by the grace of the light, Queen of Andor, protector of the realm, defender of the people, high seat of the House of Trakan. The Queen, Rand muttered, shock spreading through him in waves of numbness. For a minute he thought his head was going to begin spinning again. Don't attract any attention. Just fall into the Queen's garden and let the daughter heir tend your cuts like a hedge doctor. He wanted to laugh and knew it for the fringes of panic. Drawing a deep breath, he scrambled hastily to his feet. He held himself tightly in rein against the urge to run, but the need to get away filled him, to get away before anyone else discovered him there. Elaine and Gowan watched him calmly, and when he leaped up, they rose gracefully, not hurried in the least. He put up a hand to pull the scarf from his head, and Elaine seized his elbow. Stop that. You will stop the bleeding again. Her voice was still calm, still sure that he would do as he was told. I have to go, Rand said. I'll just climb back over the wall and... You really didn't know. For the first time, she seemed as startled as he was. Do you mean you climbed up on that wall to see Logain without even knowing where you were? You could have gotten a much better view down in the streets. I don't like crowds, he mumbled. He sketched a bow to each of them. If you'll pardon me, my lady. In the stories, royal courts were full of people all calling one another Lord and Lady and Royal Highness and Majesty. But if he had ever heard the correct form of address for the daughter heir, he could not think clearly enough to remember. He could not think clearly about anything beyond the need to be far away. If you will pardon me, I'll just leave now. Thank you for the... He touched the scarf around his head. Thank you. Without even telling us your name, Gowan said. A poor payment for Elaine's care. I've been wondering about you.
I'll be right
You
back.
sound like an Andorman, though not a Camelaner,
And
certainly.
then we'll do a couple of hits off the
like...
dab pins.
Well, you know our names. Courtesy would suggest you give us yours. Looking longingly at the wall, Rand gave his right name before he thought what he was doing, and even added, From Emmons Field and the 2 rivers. From the west, Gowan murmured. Very far to the west. Rand looked around at him sharply. There had been a note of surprise in the young man's voice, and Rand caught some of it still on his face when he turned. Gowan replaced it with a pleasant smile so quickly, though, that he almost doubted what he had seen. Tobacco and wool, Gowan said. I have to know the principal products of every part of the realm, of every land, for that matter. Part of my training. Principal products and crafts, and what the people are like. Their customs, their strengths and weaknesses. It's said 2 Rivers people are stubborn. They can be led if they think you are worthy, but the harder you try to push them, the harder they dig in. Elaine ought to choose a husband from there. It'll take a man with a will like stone to keep from being trampled by her. Rand stared at him. Elaine was staring too. Gowan looked as much under control as ever, but he was babbling. Why? What's this? All 3 of them jumped at the sudden voice and spun to face it. The young man who stood there was the handsomest man Rand had ever seen, almost too handsome for masculinity. He was tall and slender, but his movements spoke of whipcord strength and assured confidence. Dark of hair and dye, he wore his clothes, only a little less elaborate in red and white than Gowan's, as if they were of no importance. One hand rested on his sword hilt, and his eyes were steady on Rand. "Stand away from him, Elaine," the man said. "You too, Gawain." Elaine stepped in front of Rand, between him and the newcomer, head high and as confident as ever. "He is a loyal subject of our mother, and a good queen's man, and he is under my protection, Galad." Rand tried to remember what he had heard from Master Kinch, and since from Master Gil. Galadadrid Damadrid was Elaine's half-brother. Elaine's and Gawain's, if he remembered correctly.
That's it. This
The
Tangle's
three shared
down,
the
huh?
same father. Master Kinch might not have liked Tarangale Damadrid too well, neither did anyone else that he had heard. But the son was well thought of by wearers of the red and the white alike, if the talk in the city was any guide. "I am aware of your fondness for strays, Elaine," the slender man said reasonably. "But the fellow is armed, and he hardly looks reputable. In these days, we cannot be too careful. If he's a loyal queen's man, what is he doing here, where he does not belong? It is easy enough to change the wrappings on a sword, Elaine. He is here as my guest, Galad, and I vouch for him. Or have you appointed yourself my nurse to decide whom I may talk to and when?" Her voice was rich with scorn, but Galad seemed unmoved. "You know I make no claims for control over your actions, Elaine. But this guest of yours is not proper, and you know that as well as I. Gawain, help me convince her. Our mother would..." "Enough," Elaine snapped. "You are right that you have no say over my actions, nor have you any right to judge them. You may leave me. Now." Galad gave Gawain a rueful look. At one and the same time, it seemed to ask for help, while saying that Elaine was too headstrong to be helped. Elaine's face darkened, but just as she opened her mouth again, he bowed, in all formality, yet with the grace of a cat, took a step back, then turned and strode down the paved path, his long legs carrying him quickly out of sight beyond the arbor. "I hate him," Elaine breathed. "He is vile and full of envy." "There you go too far, Elaine," Gawain said. "Galad does not know the meaning of envy. Twice he has saved my life, with none to know if he held his hand. If he had not, he would be your first prince of the sword in my place. Never, Gawain. I would choose anyone before Galad. Anyone. The lowest stable boy." Suddenly she smiled and gave her brother a mock-stern look. "You say I am fond of giving orders. Well, I command you to let nothing happen to you. I command you to be my first prince of the sword when I take the throne. The light send that day is far off. And to lead the armies of Andor with the sort of honor Galad cannot dream of." "As you command, my lady," Gawain laughed, his bow a parody of Galad's. Elaine gave Rand a thoughtful frown. "Now we must get you out of here quickly." "Galad always does the right thing," Gawain explained, "even when he should not. In this case, finding a stranger in the gardens, the right thing is to notify the palace guards, which I suspect he is on his way to do right this minute." "Then it's time I was back over the wall," Rand said. "A fine day for going unnoticed. I might as well carry a sign." He turned to the wall, but Elaine caught his arm. "Not after the trouble I went to with your hands. You'll only make fresh scrapes, and then let some back alley crone put the light-nosed white on them. There is a small gate on the other side of the garden. It's overgrown, and no one but me even remembers it's there." Suddenly Rand heard boots pounding toward them over the slate paving stones. "Too late," Gawain muttered. "He must have started running as soon as he was out of eyeshot." Elaine growled an oath, and Rand's eyebrows shot up. He had heard that one from the stableman at the Queen's blessing, and had been shocked then. The next moment she was in cool self-possession once more. Gawain and Elaine appeared content to remain where they were, but he could not make himself stay for the Queen's guards with such equanimity. He started once more for the wall, knowing he would be no more than halfway up before the guards arrived, but unable to stand still. Before he had taken 3 steps, red-uniformed men burst into sight, breastplates catching the sun as they dashed up the path. Others came like breaking waves of scarlet and polished steel, seemingly from every direction. Some held drawn swords, others only waited to set their boots before raising bows and knocking feathered shafts. Behind the barred face guards, every eye was grim, and every broadhead arrow was pointed unwaveringly at him. Elaine and Gawain leaped as one, putting themselves between him and the arrows, their arms spread to cover him. He stood very still and kept his hands in plain sight, away from his sword. While the thud of boots and the creak of bowstrings still hung in the air, one of the soldiers, with the golden knot of an officer on his shoulder, shouted, "My lady, my lord, down, quickly!" Despite her outstretched arms, Elaine drew herself up regally. "You dare to bring bare steel into my presence, Talonvor? Gareth Bryn will have you mucking stables with the meanest trooper for this, if you are lucky." The soldiers exchanged puzzled glances, and some of the bowmen uneasily half-lowered their bows. Only then did Elaine let her arms down, as if she had only held them up because she wished to. Gawain hesitated, then followed her example. Rand could count the bows that had not been lowered. The muscles of his stomach tensed, as though they could stop a broadhead shaft at 20 paces. The man with the officer's knot seemed the most perplexed of all. "My lady, forgive me, but Lord Galadadrid reported a dirty peasant skulking in the gardens, armed and endangering my lady Elaine and my Lord Gawain." His eyes went to Rand, and his voice firmed. "If my lady and my lord will please to step aside, I will take the villain into custody. There is too much riffraff in the city these days." "I doubt very much if Galad reported anything of the kind," Elaine said. "Galad does not lie." "Sometimes I wish he would," Gawain said softly for Rand's ear. "Just once. It might make living with him easier." "This man is my guest," Elaine continued, "and here under my protection. You may withdraw, Talonvor." "I regret that will not be possible, my lady. As my lady knows, the Queen, your lady mother, has given orders regarding anyone on palace grounds without Her Majesty's permission, and word has been sent to Her Majesty of this intruder." There was more than a hint of satisfaction in Talonvor's voice. Rand suspected the officer had had to accept other commands from Elaine that he did not think proper. This time, the man was not about to, not when he had a perfect excuse. Elaine stared back at Talonvor. For once, she seemed at a loss. Rand looked a question at Gawain, and Gawain understood. "Prison," he murmured. Rand's face went white, and the young man added quickly, "Only for a few days, and you will not be harmed."
All right, everyone. I'm gonna call it to this guys for tonight. I want to thank everyone for stopping by, and everyone that keeps stopping by. I appreciate all y'all support. Until next time, everyone, y'all stay safe.